Pessimism is an extremely negative thing. And we think that the reason for this is extremely clear. We think pessimism is often oversaturated. We think pessimism is often not good when it's portrayed in media. There's a few points of setup on the very top of my speech. The first being, what does optimism on our side of the house look like in the very first place? The first clarification, I think, is that we're not actively denying the existence of social issues, which is to say that we will say that things like racism exist. We will say that things like, for instance, like misogyny exists. We say that the only difference is that we have, for instance, happy endings, and we have, for instance, a lot of times where it looks like we have more vibrant colors, or we portray these issues as more hopeful rather than, for instance, obsolete. We think the only difference is that in the end we have a solution and we resolve the tension between, for instance, the two parties inside this movie story, etc., etc. What does the pessimistic portrayal probably look like? We think the idea is to let audiences know how awful the world is and or how awful the social issue is. By the way, if you feel I'm just say what I guess you could. Right. We think oftentimes what this means is you have bad endings in which you don't find a solution to the issue. We think oftentimes what this means is people are portrayed as extremely terrible. For instance, like in a movie about racism, we think oftentimes the white Caucasian male is portrayed as extremely racist and uneducated. We think oftentimes this is exactly what's going to exist on their side of the house. What we're going to prove to you in this debate is that we prefer optimistic depiction because it's able to convey these issues in a more palatable manner. We think oftentimes this is only achievable on our side of the house. We get more buy-in. This debate should exist under the idea that both sides have some form of results to the audiences, or else it's a wash. We think oftentimes we have to talk about the message in this debate. The argument we're going to tell you about is how we're able to get more buy-in and how that results in more effective change on our side of the house. There's a few layers to this. The first is that pessimism as a whole is very oversaturated. We think this is because of the spread of, for instance, dystopia or very, very negative stories with terrible endings or the lack of solution. We think oftentimes what this means is you have mass hysteria. We think this causes oversaturation because sometimes the pessimism completely overwhelms the actual theme, which is to say, the pessimism is so strong that you do not understand the message that, or for instance, the social issue that you're fighting against anymore. The second layer is that people generally want to be optimistic. We think this is because people want to believe that their future is extremely bright. They want to believe that the future is going to make them happy. They want to be hopeful the future is going to be good for them. Secondly, we think people like to feel happy. We think this is pretty intuitive as well. We think when you circulate negative messaging, we think people feel worthless. We think that they feel purposeless, and we think oftentimes this is extremely detrimental when you're trying to message them about certain social issues that needs fixing. We think oftentimes when you make it seem obsolete, this is extremely detrimental, yes.
How do you ensure the audience will care and try to fix the issue if they already see it solved in the movie?
look, we don't think it's solved in the movie on their side of the house, right? On their side of the house, there's probably a lack of solution. On our side of the house, we think there is a solution, but we think that oftentimes this solution is probably a short-term one, which is to say that, for instance, if it's about slavery, it's about the person escaping from slavery, not the person ending slavery. We think that's the extreme difference here. The third layer then is about escapism, because generally we think that this type of media is a form of relaxation. We think this is because people watch it because it is a break from reality. We think what this means then is it's better for people to understand optimistic media and more optimistic views coming from this media in the very first place, because we'd argue that oftentimes it's easier to absorb. We think it oftentimes is more palatable to the audience rather than extremely dark and extremely terrible pessimism coming from this type of media. Why is optimism so beneficial for these individuals then, and why are we uniquely able to get much more buy-in on our side of the house? We think this is for two reasons. One, we think pessimism causes paranoia. We think this is because, for instance, when you map out a racial minority, for instance, which is being oppressed by another, for instance, majority, we think oftentimes it's extremely detrimental, because what this means is you strengthen the divide between them in the very first place, and oftentimes what this means is that you view the other as the oppressed. You feel like you view the other as the villain. We think oftentimes what this means is you have more negative stereotypes against, for instance, like the white Caucasian being racist or uneducated. We think oftentimes this only strengthens the divide between these groups. Secondly, I think optimism means that you see the good in certain individuals as well. There are social issues, but we think oftentimes when it ends well, you are able to make sure you are able to better forgive these people in the very first place. You know about these social issues, but we think generally on our side of the house, we're able to make it so that these people do not feel hate or anger towards the other group simply because a solution is found. Simply because the tension is eased at the end of the day on the media that's portrayed on our side of the house uniquely, never prior to the show.
Hello, can everyone hear me? 4 points of rebuttal then before moving on to key recharacterizations for this debate. First, on the point of happy ending, how gets more people to become hopeful. We think that being hopeful does not translate to, we think that being hopeful translates to inaction. Why is this? Because we see that optimistic depictions often give you shallow mechanisms and solutions as to how you actually solve these social issues in the movie, right? For example, in the Barbie movie, Barbie literally just started talking to the other Kent or whatever to solve the issue. Or for example, how Black Panther is a superhero. We think it is extremely unrealistic. But secondly, on the point about how pessimism is oversaturated, we think that this is untrue because it is oversaturated because it is portrayed realistically in these movies, right? We think that if the director decided to oversaturate, it would get negative reviews from the audiences anyways. We say that even if it was oversaturated, it makes the audience understand the severity of these social issues and the urgency in which that they need to help to solve and contribute to these issues. But thirdly then, on the point on like how optimism makes it more palatable, we agree that optimistic worldviews might be more palatable on their side, but we think that the more palatable aspects are the happy elements that you add to the movie. For example, like Barbie and her like friends, her dresses and such. We think on their side, the social issues you bring up are actually less palatable because they have to be shined in a covert way or a fluffed up way where the main messaging does not get across and needs further analysis from the audience to actually understand the social issues that are trying to present to you in the movie. But fourthly then, on the point about negative emotions, it can cause things like chaos or evoke strong emotions. We think that strong emotions is exactly what you need right now to actually drive social change, right? We'll go to in our bench. Next then, on a few key recharacterizations. Firstly, we think that art is created to serve a purpose and to have a significant meaning to begin with. And we think that these artists create what resonates with them, which is why these movies are going to be realistic at the end of the day. But most importantly, we think the goal is to get the most people to understand the art or the social issues being portrayed and actually take action when these things are being portrayed, right? But most importantly, what does the depiction of an optimistic view look like? We think it looks like shining light on issues in a covert way, meaning that you will need to actually do a deeper analysis into what social issue this movie is actually trying to solve. And we see this evident from movies like Black Panther, where most viewers do not understand that the underlying issue is developing nations, right? But second, we think that since these issues are not shown in its full extremity and sensitivity, it means that it covers up the urgency of the problem that you need to solve, and it removes the emotional shock that the audiences get when they actually watch these movies, because you need to tone it down in order for it to be optimistic in the first place, right? We think that the pessimistic worldview will show the issues in all its full form and all its severity, because it wants to appeal to viewers' emotions and sympathy. For example, in Parasite, you see extremely clear metaphor to show the divide between the rich and the poor. Therefore, we think that the messaging gets across more on our side, where audiences do not have to actually interpret the messaging themselves after watching the movie, and they become more invested as well when they actually understand what is going on in the plot, right? The stance on our side then is that we want the movie to keep lingering in audiences' minds and process these issues in a way that translates to action. The burden of proof then is that people understand the message of the art that the art is trying to create and actually take action on our side. Why is this the most important burden? We think it's because it fulfills the goal of why the art was created in the first place, and it can then translate to a positive impact on the world, for example, through advocacy. We think that there's a principle underlying in our case, which is that the fact that these social issues portrayed in media are actual issues that affect people's daily lives and are actually realistic in what people in our world actually experience every day. We think that it would show light on things that, for example, might be stripping away their human rights or harming them in some sort of form, such as things like misogyny or racism. We think that the portrayal of these issues then should be accurate to what these people are actually experiencing in their day-to-day life, to make sure that it is the most dignified and true version as possible, and not undermine the severity of their issues through happy elements that these optimistic worldview actually portray. Yes?
If the people must think about the underlying message of the movie after they watch it, of the art, isn't that a better way to transition it?
No, because we are saying that most people on your side, when they see these optimistic movies, they actually do not then go home and further analyze the messaging the movie is trying to spread. Moving on then to our second argument about how pessimistic worldview is the most effective way to create social change. Why do people care more on our side? We think because one, pessimistic worldview evokes more emotion. We think that, for example, in movies like Parasite, where you see these real life people actually struggling through every day, we think that as audiences, you feel things like sympathy for them, or you feel saddened by this because you see that this is a true depiction of what actually is happening in your day-to-day life and not some imaginary figure like a superhero on the screen. But most importantly, I think that because it creates a sense of relatability and it evokes emotion and sympathy within you because you see the severity and the actual ways these people are being hurt right now. It becomes more long-lasting to you. The effects of these feelings that you feel then will translate to you wanting to take more action because these images or these struggles are stuck in your mind. But most importantly, we think that when you see real people's struggles, you feel more guilt and you want to take action because you see that you yourself might be part of the problem as well. But secondly then, on connection, we think because pessimistic worldviews are not hopeful, you would then see real elements such as things like relatability. Maybe you feel that you also experience this in your day-to-day life, or how you do not need to interpret this messaging more deeper in order to actually understand the message that the movie is trying to get across to you. But most importantly, we think that it is more humane in a sense where you can relate to these actual people that you see on the screen more. We think that for the simple fact that it is more complex in the sense of how they show these issues means that people going into the movies are more prepared to actually understand and absorb all of these information anyways, as opposed to them maybe wanting to go to see a superhero movie, not realizing that there's a social issue underlying it, and then not wanting to go further analyze later on when they get home. We think on our side we get people to be more invested and evoke stronger emotions, which would then be able to translate to them taking action through things like maybe petitions, protests, or advocating for these issues. Because we think that when something is not just like passing through you, it lingers in your mind and it makes you wonder why you haven't done anything to actually help them solve this issue in the real world. Or when you see these issues in your day-to-day life and you see that, oh, maybe it's like the person you walk past every day when you go home, you become more invested in these issues, therefore you would take more action on our side. We think that because like a main mechanism on our side is also that people realize that because it is like real life people being depicted, they realize that they are also part of the problem. That's why these social issues are still happening and they feel a sense and urgency to help solve extremely practical problems.
Hello. Okay.
Can we go first? Okay. Someone is in the back. This way.
So, how does he end?
When someone is in the back.
Oh,
wait.
I'm so sorry. I didn't
Yeah, you can start whenever you're ready.
Whether or not pessimism is a reality that is far more realistic or relatable, what we tell you that it doesn't achieve is one that presents a solution. Because in this current status quo, what matters is not just identifying the problem, rather it is one that creates a pathway, a gateway for individuals and minorities to understand that there is a way out. That's what I was proud to propose. 3 things I'll do in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to briefly respond to the 2 argumentations coming from opposition. Secondly, I'm going to rebut Eric's argument and explain why it's the most important in this debate. And lastly, I'm going to give you an extension as to particularly why social messaging is ineffective in pessimism. Firstly, I want to respond, and the first argument here, and major argument, is in terms of social change. But before I move on to specifically provide responses for this, I want to note there's particularly a lack of actual analysis as to why people are likely to change their opinions insofar as you see this. Given that, I think there are 3 responses here. The first thing to say is to flip them. I would argue relatability is bad. Why is it the case? Because theoretically, insofar as you see your life as one that applies or is in line with a dystopia, that's when you're theoretically likely to feel depressed. That's particularly what Eric tells you. And insofar as this happens, we tell you don't take valid takeaways, or you don't particularly gain anything from the experience, because in and of itself feel negative feelings, and you oftentimes don't want to feel them. The second thing to say here is I want to point out a lack of a kind of a missing link within the arguments, which is to say, stronger emotions doesn't necessarily necessitate actions. Which is to say, even if we accept that on their side, you feel massive guilt about your actions and what you particularly do, this doesn't create actions in the vast majority of cases. And I would argue it's actually counterproductive, because insofar as you feel stronger emotions, that's when you're more likely to suppress them. Thirdly, I want to flip their response and their analysis. They say that guilt is productive in terms of creating change. I would argue this isn't the case. If we're going to provide structural analysis to provide why our responses are better than theirs, I would argue guilt is counterproductive. And the reason why it doesn't work is because it's easier to bury your guilt than actually change. Because it's easier to bury your guilt in other things within your life other than addressing it head on. And that's the reason why on their side, guilt is likely to be ineffective. Their second argument is why optimism doesn't have effective messaging because most people don't realize that it's about a structural issue. The first thing to say here is I would argue this is an assertion and there's not particular amount of reasoning to prove as to why you're unable to actually understand what this social issue is. I would argue in issues like Black Panther, it is quite obvious in terms of amount of culture that is within it. And the reason why this is the case is obviously I would argue optimism is one that presents a solution to these struggles. And what that means is you need to present these arguments in and of itself. I would argue this takes down the premise of their argument. The second thing to say here is even if it is true that people don't understand social messaging at once, I would argue this is actually beneficial. Because sure, even if you don't understand it at once, I would argue that having the social messaging incredibly obvious is incredibly harmful. Because that's when you're likely to create incredibly shallow messages. I think that flips their argument then. Given that honorable Eric's argument, his argument was in terms of buy-in and particularly why that was beneficial. There were two parts to his argument. Firstly, he explained why optimism creates buy-in, both from people viewing the art at that moment, but also for those about to or considering to. And he gave you 4 reasons why. A, he talked about oversaturation, particularly why pessimism isn't likely to appeal to you. Secondly, he talked about relatability. Thirdly, he talked about hope, and lastly on paranoia. The second part of his analysis as to why optimism is particularly beneficial. His first thing to say was that pessimism oftentimes isolates individuals. I'm going to expand on this later in my extension. Secondly, he told you that this strengthens divide, and lastly, he told you in terms of happiness and hope. I want to note the engagement here was quite wishy-washy in terms of them trying to flip our arguments, but not actually succeeding to do so. Their first response here was to say, well, hopefulness isn't effective, because insofar as you're hopeful, that you don't act. And no, I think this is kind of a straw man of what hope really means. Because hope is not that salvation will come for sure, rather it can come through your own efforts. That is what Eric told you, and I think it's a mischaracterization to say hope is one in which you say that you think the solution comes to you directly. And the second response here was to say that strong emotions are good. Even if this is the case, I would argue the strong emotions that particularly make you feel bad, as Eric talked about, is not good. I would argue the responses are not incredibly sufficient here. I'll take that here why.
I'm still not sure why, in your recital house, optimism, media using optimism are will be exploring these topics in depth.
I mean, I think we already explained that quite sufficiently. Firstly, I would argue this is necessary in terms of providing a solution. So obviously, optimistic movies are more likely to have an in-depth analysis because they go one step further than just identifying and exaggerating the problem. That's particularly as to why it is further and better than that pessimistic alternative on their side. I want to make our argument then. Before that, I want to talk about particularly the importance of Eric's argument. And I think this includes, and this happens and materializes on 2 levels. Firstly, it explains as to why this is particularly widespread, even if it is true that optimistic messaging is far more shallow, insofar as we're able to reach more people, and that offsets that to a significant extent. The second thing to say here is I would argue, insofar as we're able to explain that pessimism makes you feel depressed, and oftentimes people want to bury their depression, and that's a mechanism as to why they're unlikely to create change. In the comparison, we tell you as to why optimism makes you feel good, it gives you hope, and those are ones that you're more likely to act upon. The reason why we weigh over them is quite simple in terms of magnitude and importance, insofar as we are able to flip them and also explain how we reach more people. I'm going to move on to my extension then, as to why social messaging is ineffective in pessimism. And here on government will actually give you reasons why. 3 reasons. Firstly, I would argue it doesn't present a solution, which is to say, rather it indicates that there are none. For example, what does this look like? And it looks like depicting the oppressors within these movies as an overwhelming evil, as looking like they have massive power. It looks like George Orwell's 1984, where the totalitarian state has absolute power. And the reason why this is harmful is because A, it creates a sense of hopelessness. And no matter how hard you try, your opponent is always stronger than you. But secondly, it means it's ineffective in nature. Secondly, I would argue pessimism spends too much time exaggerating these issues. The problem here is that everyone already knows issues. The question here is how you solve them. Lastly, I would argue pessimism isolates others. It isolates the people abused to villainize within these movies. The problem here is those are the people you really want to reach, insofar as they're the ones perpetuating these problems. Ultimately, whether or not society is one that is good or bad, we tell you optimism is one that reaches more people. It is easier to face an optimistic world and think your future is bright rather than buried. That's why we're proud to propose.
Panel, when the silence came out in Korea, people were outraged and horrified because the movie depicted gory and horrifying images of deaf students being sexually harassed and taken advantage of those who were supposed to care for them. When they try to provide you the mechanism that, oh, stronger emotions doesn't link to action because more people are likely to suppress them, we say this example counters their case because there was action. There was a huge nationwide social change in Korea, insofar as to say there were movements because people felt guilty. People were outraged at the actions and the experiences that these marginalized individuals had to face. And they saw that the only way to actually change it, to actually protect these people, was if they stood up and did something about it rather than staying ignorant. Panel, the reason Parasite is so successful and influential was because it was shocking, right? We don't think you can claim that your side gets more buy-in, especially when the examples themselves show many of these pessimistic media being highly influential and still being talked about to this day. Parasite is easily the most talked about movie of this decade and from Korea. It shows gory, it shows feeling, it shows a clear divide that the poor, even though the poor try to climb up the social ladder so hard in society, it shows that there was systematic oppression and systematic issues that cannot be fixed with your shallow solutions, right? 3 things I'll be covering that in my speech. First, let's look at the type of hope or solution they provide. They say their side is the only side where optimism presents a solution. But their first speaker already conceded to the fact in his argument that these solutions are likely to be short-term ones in the movement, right? Because we see that social issues in the status quo, like racism or misogyny, has been so deep-rooted that I don't think 20 minutes or 1 hour of screen time can really show a multi-layered solution as to how to fix it. When we look at the Barbie movie, right, the reason it has a happy ending is because the issue of misogyny is dumped down to a scale where the misogyny only exists in this bubble, not in the real world. In the movie, it shows misogyny or, sexism being solved by Barbie literally just talking to her brainwashed friends to emotionally appeal to the men. We think this is unrealistic and it doesn't get the viewer to actually care for misogyny. Because the viewers who see this issue as dumbed down don't really understand the complexities of it and think that, oh, these issues are going to be resolved with, more talking, more negotiations in society. But those movements who are fighting for feminism can't use the Barbie movie either, since it depicts misogyny in such a way that it's not complex, that it can be easily fixed. We don't think this is okay in these circumstances, right? But when they, yes?
Yeah, so as you say, in Parasite, presumes that climbing up the social ladder is impossible, then on your side, why would people still try to do so?
I don't understand that comment because the message of Parasite was to show that the clear divide and inequality in Korea is such an urgent problem that rich people or medium income people were more likely to care about it rather than only focusing on themselves and their livelihoods because they see poor people in the movie literally having to kill the rich to just get by, right? Now, when they talk about buy-in and when they say that, oh, people are more likely to, buy into their movies and people are more likely to get a message or action out of this movie but they also concede then that people are more likely to be happy and want realization or breaks from reality. What this means then, that in a movie there will be the beginning, the middle where there are a lot of problems and the resolution. We say that in a movie people care the most about the ending. We remember the ending the most because that is what matters most to us. We just want to know how it ends. On their side, when people have the rhetoric that going into Barbie, you just turn off your brains, you want to focus on the happy moments and how the movie has a happy ending, we think people leave the cinema not realizing the social issues it is trying to imply, but more so thinking about the happy moments that the characters have experienced because they want a relaxation from reality. This is playing into their characterization, right? Because when you go to optimistic media, you go into it because you want to feel happy. Therefore, you are less likely or more likely to suppress the negative emotions. Therefore, on your side, we don't see why people are going to care about these social issues in the first place. We say the mindset that this social issues is getting better and these people are being falsely hopeful is more hopeful on your side then. But then, why does our side do it better? Now they try again to, say that relatability is bad because people will become depressed and they won't want to take action. We say what overweighs this depression is the harm, right? People see that in pessimism, there are individuals or minority groups or themselves being harmed in the situation. We say the urge of humans who want to get out of these circumstances, to find a way out, is stronger than to linger in depression because depression gets you nowhere. People have to move on in some way, shape, or form one day. And we also say that on our side, what we effectively do, what we most effectively provide is the mechanism of social shock, of emotional shock. When you see these gory images, these gory and depressing events ongoing, it is more likely to linger in your mind. You cannot deny that fact, right? If you want to say that your movies stick in people's minds longer, that is simply untrue and would be an assertion. Therefore, even if your side somehow gets more buy or gets a larger audience for these movies, we don't think it sticks to them as much. They only remember the happy moments. Therefore, they are likely going to take action. Whereas on our side, when it lingers on their mind, they are more likely to actually look deeper into it, to try to understand the issues, or at the very least, search online for alternatives and opportunities and campaigns wherein they can save people from these situations, to create critical mass, to create action and change. We think that at the end of the day, guilt and negative emotions are the strongest, similar to how we can't simply suppress trauma or move on from it, because it is constantly hindering our daily lives. We want a way for us to, feel moral high ground, to feel that we are not like those in the movie, to want to, appear better to society. Therefore, we think a pessimistic worldview in these forms of art do it better, especially since the message is easier to understand insofar as it isn't covered up by happy moments in these movies. For all these reasons then, so proud to
Maybe I am uneducated about movies, but I've never heard of the two movies Dialogy. Yet I think it's because of the violence and the gore that exists within the movies. That is to say, it's harder, for example, kids to exist and look at these movies, rather than, for example, Barbie, in which it has already reached out to so many children, and we actually understand what it's meaning about, right? Second, I think the only mitigation on our side, about our side, was example debate, in which we tell you the two examples of the movies. But I would like to say that it's not mutually exclusive, which is to say that, for example, Barbie can still be saw as revolutionary, because so many girls are now playing with Barbie as an action to say that girls can also have the same jobs that men have. I think this is an example that has gotten through to a lot of people and not necessarily shallow, because throughout the whole movie, it's depicting how able to get their like patriarchy and like take back the like men taking back like patriarchy and allow women to still feel empowered. Therefore, I would argue that these examples are not mutually exclusive on their side. But to move on to the clash about the result, I'm going to talk about this in two forms. First of all, the emotion, that is to say, how you're going to feel when you first watch it, and second of all, the enlightenment, which is to say, the solution and how you're going to act because of it. So first, what do people feel out of it? I think opposition mostly says that optimism is sugarcoating, therefore you don't really care about it, and it's very shallow. But second, that you actually get emotions and deep emotions because you watch these like really sad movies depicting all the horrible things in the world. What we tell you is that people are more likely to be happy, therefore there's more buy-in. That is to say, people want to watch this movie because they want to feel happy, because their life is already so stressful, and now you're putting this extra burden on them to say you are the issue, or you are the victim, and make them feel like not necessarily they can change anything. Because on both sides, this emotion can reach to people. The difference is how we're going to fix it. That, why do we win on this? First of all, if you're a really sad movie and you feel guilty about it, the majority of people don't want to accept it. I mean, the only reason they say they mitigated this is by using their examples of how people started a protest or something, right? But we actually tell you reasons as to why people don't want to accept it and don't want to think about it, right? The reason is very simple. Because people don't want to put the extra burden on themselves. If they are seen as actively the enemy in the movie, then they're more likely going to just think that the movie is being mean to them, or like not very like kind to the people of the enemy, and not that they're actually doing something wrong. The comparative is that if the problem is properly depicted, yet solved, it more likely makes sense, and you understand the issue, right? That looks like Ken in the Barbie movie not being depicted as a villain, and moreover, finding himself and enlightening himself. I mean, this is a comparative, because if this were a pessimistic movie, Ken would be actively depicted as an enemy. Then, second, emotions are not mutually exclusive. The only difference is that you want to stick with it as a sad feeling in a comparative that you cannot change, right? That is to say that on their side, they're more likely going to think that they cannot change this because there's no solution as to how to change it, right? Essentially, if you feel guilty, you feel scared, and the majority of people will try to deny their fear. Second, I want to talk about the result. Before I move on to that, are there any feelings? 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's move on to our clash about the result then. Yes, the solution may be shallow or really easy. For example, in the Barbie movie, where she talks to a lot of girls. But it's good, because it's easier to understand. Because you cannot think that people will buy into a very complex and very closely intertwined solution that asks you to do a lot of steps. Otherwise, on our side, we're able to actually say that, look, if you talk to more girls, if you actually make them understand that they don't get controlled by patriarchy, then it's easier. These people still have the freedom, and they're still able to understand what they're supposed to do and the way to mitigate it. The only reason that we make it so easy is because it's easier for people to understand. But second, I think it's easier because the feeling when you figure out something like a riddle is very important. For example, if you're watching a horror movie and you actually see the underlying issue within it, or the underlying idea within it, then you're more likely going to think about it. I think this is very easily shown through movie reviews, where people don't just forget about the movie after they watch it because they think the movie is interesting, because they find a solution. I think it's more likely that people are going to understand. But I would argue that it's wrong that they tell you and they constantly assert that people will not understand the underlying issue. Because I think it's very, very, very clear in the Barbie movie that the whole issue is about feminism. Because Barbie has been depicted as a sign of feminism, as showing how women can be empowered. So I'm not really sure why they can just tell you that, okay, Barbie movie will not be understood simply because it's a shallow kids movie, right? But second, about hope. I think on our side, the solution is presented, right? But people know that it's not fixed in the society. That is to say, their LO cannot come up here and say, because the solution is fixed in the movie, then people actively think that they don't have to change it in the society. Because on our side, when it's fixed in the movie, they see that it cannot be fixed in the society, and therefore they can actively try to fix it in the society. Note that this also means that because the solution is rather easy, and because it's depicted as something that can be achieved, they're more likely going to try to achieve it. Rather, on their side, right, many people have to come together and have to use this movie as a sign of saying okay, we're gonna protest. But I think that's very hard because it's very hard to get a lot of people who don't think this is is necessarily their fault, who don't think or necessarily relate to this and are scared of this to come together, right? But second, I think that hope is necessary, right? Because it is the only incentive you have to fight. If you are an active victim of, for example, being bullied, it is harder if you see that nothing can be done because you're depicted with gore, right? I think that you're more likely to have fear for the society. For example, if there's a movie about capitalism where like it's depicting that people cannot come out of the cycle of capitalism, right? I think that it's more likely that if the movie is depicted as someone who is able to fall out of the cycle and the movie is able to have hope, then it's more likely people believe in themselves and not have fear for going against it. Finally, I think that it's not just about being oppressed, because it's also about the opponents. Essentially, in a pessimism movie, people are more likely going to see the other side as the enemy. That is to say that first of all, there's less hope on their side, but second, that the opponents are villainized. I think this is something DPM has already explained. Like, the opponents are villainized, therefore there's less of an incentive for them to try to work with you because they're seen as an active enemy. I think this is not supposed to happen because it's very hard. The people you are trying to actively get to are now not understanding this, and they are only seeing themselves as the enemy and the person who wants to deny the truth. I think this is why in our world, for example, in Ken's environment, we're able to have Barbie and Ken still living in the same world and having like happiness essentially. Thank you.
Hello, is this volume okay? Now let's go back to the start. What is exactly the point of movies surrounding social issues in the very first place? We argue, and we would all agree, it is to make people more aware of these issues and to be able to understand them more. And we think that the current world, what it currently looks like, is that people already know issues exist. Like, for example, most of the people know that sexism exists, that men have historically discriminated against women. However, they know it in passing, and they do not care much about it because it seems like it is something so far away from them, something so far in the past. So therefore, we believe that by having an optimistic worldview of what these can actually look like, right? It can actually make people not care about it going into the theater, not care about it coming out because they think that the solution has already been provided, that they can, that even if they're gonna solve it, they have to just do this very like simple thing and it elevates the very important issue that it is trying to tackle, right? The government tries to claim that they gain a more massive scale, but we believe that we are most importantly focusing on people who can make an impact, not kids who are going to see Barbie, right? We think it's going to be focusing on the middle class people or like the higher class people who go to watch Parasite and see that they are the problem within the current status quo. So two main clashes in today's debate. First clash is about which side conveys the message more clearly, and second about which side gains more social change, right? So first of all, what the side government's main push is that positive media creates more widespread, it creates more violent, therefore a more positive response. So what does this actually achieve? Notice, panel, that the only impact coming from side of government of this is simply just that the viewers gain more happiness and they have to escape from their real life. We think that this is particularly harmful because when people feel good about something or they feel like it is detached from the real world, they distance these issues from themselves in the real world and the movie. Therefore, it leads to less understanding and less application of it actually fixing or intention or lack of action about actually fixing these things. And they would rather not think about these things because they think it's just a movie and it doesn't relate to my real life, right? Second of all, it is very impactful, right? Because a lot of the time when people watch these movies and come out of it, they do not really think and contemplate on whether it is important or so or not. And therefore, it is not the desired image, it is not the
goal the directors of the movie wanted to achieve in the very first place. This is the most important concession that they have made because it completely defeats the goal of these movies in the very first place, right? So why is this important? This is important because the solution is exactly why it's bad, right? The first speaker concedes that when you solve these little problems, right, you make it only significantly a little bit better or like create short-term decisions. We argue that by not solving these problems, it actually presents a better solution, a better worldview for these people because in real life, you can never solve issues of discrimination, you can never solve anything, you can only resolve to make it better. So we believe that in more pessimistic stories, it can provide solutions as to how we can treat other people to make these issues better, rather than simplifying the issue to such a simple thing that talking to people can already help at the first place, right? Not only that, but to tackle their point of exaggeration. We think this is not very important, right? Like the Assata house, people are villainized, and it will be very hard for people to engage and see themselves in a very bad light. Therefore, they're unlikely to absorb these messages, right? We argue that it's actually the opposite on their side of the house because it is in order to make these movies happy, they are not likely to make people like monsters completely impalatable, right? Because they want to still make the movie fun and full of escapism, right? Therefore, there are, for example, Ken is a very generalized caricature of patriarchy in the very first place. So instead, when the viewers see Ken, instead of realizing the societal narrative that causes men to be patriarchic, to have toxic masculinity in such a way, people see him just like a fun, goofy character, and that doesn't embody the exact message of what the movie wants to give you, right? And not only that, we believe that exaggeration does not exist on our side of the house, and even if these people are very evil, we believe that the depth that comes into it, like for example, of the leader from the Handmaid's Tale, who is proved very despicable by his humanness, by that he is a hypocrite. Even though he locks women up, he still wants to have sexual relations with them, right? So therefore, we believe that to solve these problems is only to dumb them down and to convey that these issues are very easily solved, right? Here, point, please.
Yeah, so according to you, people want to appeal to the majority, and that's why you're unlikely to villainize them. If this is true, then how do you get your guilt in that?
People are not unlikely to to exaggerate because they want to appeal to a majority. People are very unlikely in the current status quo to villainize characters because they want the character to be seen as multifaceted, right? But the reason why it's more likely in your world is because they want these issues to seem more powerful. They want the racist white guy to just seem like very racist from the start, and that like his mind can be very easily fixed, right? It is to create a more black and white version of what this world is, to create a very easy solution as how you can fix it, right? Moving on to the second clash about which side creates more social change. We think this clash is very important and it is so crucial that side argument has barely proved anything to support it, right? Because it sparks what the intention of the movie actually wants. Discussion, people taking it seriously, people taking action to ensure that the thing that the movie presents actually gets solved in real life, right? So even if we think we can't do it, we still gain a lot of appreciation and a lot of explanation as to why these things and all, right? So not only that, our mechanization is very simple, right? Because of the strong emotions that it garners in you, it lingers in your mind. There are only rebuttal for this is that people will feel so sad that they can't take action, right? We believe that the people who repress it will repress it on either side of the house. We believe these repressed people will go to Barbie and think misogyny probably isn't that bad, right? So we believe that the majority of people would rather feel irked about it and have this sinking, clawing feeling in their mind that they are, and they believe that this ineffectiveness, this feeling that they are ineffective and they cannot do anything is actually going to work in favor of us because then they can think that, maybe I can just treat poor people better, maybe I can just pay more taxes and donate more, and they can actually create change, right? Not only just social movements, not just petitions, but also just treating people better and spreading more information as to why. And we believe that even if they achieve social change on their side of the house, it's going to be very shallow social change. For example, because of the very shallow views of solutions that they have given. For example, yes. Therefore, we're very proud to oppose.
if they want to push that our side is the side that makes people feel depressed, guilty, and villainizes those oppressors, we take the hard stance then. Because we'd much rather prefer more movies like The Handmaid's Tale versus Barbie, right? We prefer people actually seeing the oppressors in these situations, seeing the harms they have caused to the oppressed, which are the women in this case, and not settling for a compromise with the oppressor in power. We want anger, we want critical mass, and most importantly, we want people to deeply care about these issues, and for these issues to linger in their mind, insofar as to say they want to actually solve it and are willing to take action. Three things then. First, let's look at exposure. They try to say that their side has more buy-in. We say this is factually untrue because on both sides, you already have influential media present. For example, Parasite, where it creates a lot of discussion, or 1984, which is considered one of the best classics from George Orwell, right? But we say that if their side wants to gain attention from people like children or other forms of audiences, we say that children can't do much anyways, because when they watch movies like Barbie, they won't look into the issue deeper anyways, because the issue is covered up and fluffed up to the point where you need comprehension skills to actually get what the movie is trying to convey. And we say we don't prioritize children because they are too young to have much of the capacity to change anyways, right? But we also say then that even if their exposure is greater than ours, not all exposure is good exposure, especially when on their side, people walk into these optimistic movies thinking only about happy moments or only expecting to have a good time. This means that after they leave the theater, after turning off their brains, they mostly remember the happy moment, the happy ending, and feel their false hopefulness that doesn't actually create any action. Instead, hope takes away from the urgency of the issue and the urge to take care of these oppressed individuals, right? But secondly then, when they want to talk about solution, they try to say that, oh, people on their side are more likely to try to achieve these solutions, but what they fail to see is that their case lies on the premise that the solutions on their side are more shallow, more dumbed down, and are unable to show the complexities of these issues. What this means then is that even if people on their side somehow care about these issues to the point where they want to solve it, they don't actually have the capacity or knowledge to actually solve it because they saw the solutions as being so dumbed down, or they feel that, oh, since the solution is so easy, I can push the responsibility onto someone else or onto the minorities, they can save themselves, they can compromise with the oppressors, and they can get out of their own situations. We say that on our side, we actually urge people to take a look at the other people outside of their lives who actually prioritize these social issues because it causes an emotional shock to them to the point where it harms their emotional stability in everyday life, right? But when they try to say that, oh, if more people watch Parasite, they are going to feel more depressed, we say that this isn't the only audience of the movie, right? Parasite literally reaches the global scale. It also reaches middle income and higher income people, or people who are able to actually save the situation, or people who are actually able to create movements to fix these issues like the scientists, right? But lastly then, hope versus negative emotions. We say on our side, these emotions stick to you longer because of the shock, because of the guilt you have, because of the feeling of wanting to have the moral high ground, of trying to live a fulfilling life by trying to help others and get rid of this guilt. We think that the hope on their side is very shallow again, and it doesn't last that long, because insofar as you have hope for these issues, you start to care about them less, because you see that it is already being solved, and we say you are more so going to focus on the happy things from this movie, on the happiest moments in your life, or just issues about yourself in general, instead of focusing on those vulnerable people who have been harmed from these issues. At the end of the day then, we win this debate on all levels, including the principle, wherein we actually create good representation and don't undermine the dignity of these individuals. Thank you.
Hello. Should I just start? At the end of this debate, one question remains for opposition. If the capitalist regime in Parasite is so powerful, then how do you expect an average individual to stand up to this? How do you expect them to suddenly change society? And I think that's the problem with opposition case. Even if you do assume that, for example, you feel guilt, ultimately, what they also concede is that these capitalistic systems, the oppressors within these movies, are overwhelmingly powerful. And if this is true, I would argue this not only creates guilt, it creates hopelessness. The first piece of clarification I want to have before I move on to my clash on effective action is I want to note that they kind of try to flip escapism. But I want to note that they misinterpret escapism. Escapism is not distancing yourself from life within the movie, but rather it is escaping from sadness. Given that, I want to move on to my first clash on effective action. Ultimately, this clash comes down to two pushes from both sides. Their push is that, for example, the first thing they say is that when you feel guilty, you're likely to act. We already told you multiple things under here, and I can explain why these rebuttals are particularly effective. The first thing we told you was to explain why you're more likely to bury bad feelings rather than actually trying to create change. And the reason why this rebuttal is more effective than any of their analysis is because we actually give you incentive analysis. We tell you what it is to actually make you act, and why that particular bar isn't going to be reached by guiltiness. We tell you that it's easier to bury your feelings, and we give you incentive analysis, something that opposition neglects to provide. The second thing we told you was that obviously, I would argue, they don't really prove the fact that guilt necessitates action, and I think fundamentally that means we take this clash. No, also, their only rebuttal here was to say, well, this is symmetrical, you're going to bury your feelings on both sides, but this misses the point of our argument, because what we're saying is you only bury your feelings when they're negative. Given that, I want to move on to the second push within this clash. Their second push is that the optimism's message is incredibly hard to understand. There are three things to say here. A, I want to note the concession that comes out from here. Because if you accept the optimism message is hard to understand, then you'll also accept that there are implicit things that are deeper within optimism's messaging. Secondly, I would argue this is untrue, and note that we're the only side that explains optimism and presents a solution, meaning the message should be even clearer. We actually give you a reason as to why optimism is clear. I think opposition neglects to do so. The third thing we tell you is even if their entire case is basically, well, you need comprehension to understand optimistic movies. And we tell you quite intuitively, people have enough comprehension to understand the feminist underlying, or for example, the structural underlining between Black Panther, right? I'll argue if the entire case is that you need comprehension to understand this. I think the quite simple response is that on our side, people do. Note that we also present the same two pushes. Note a lot of it is unengaged, like Eric's oversaturation argument. But even if you assume that all the analysis is engaged with, I want to explain why our analysis is particularly better than theirs. First push then, how do you react to what you feel? Note this is our first push. We tell you when you feel guilty, you bury it. They tell you when you feel guilty, you act. Given that, why is our analysis better? Two levels. First, we're the only side that presents incentive. We contextualize what it takes for you to act, the necessary barrier for you to make a structural change within society. And we tell you as to why this doesn't support a burden. I tell you that incentive analysis coming from opposition is lacking. Secondly, we both talk about the majority and minority. We talk about how this appeals to both the people who perpetuate these problems as well as the people who face them. Ultimately, on magnitude, we're able to win this push. The second push is on effective messaging. The reason why we win is, let's say you accept both pushes. You accept that, for example, optimism doesn't necessarily have it's kind of hard to understand optimism's message. And you also accept our messaging as, for example, like our push on effective messaging. If you accept both, the reason why we win is quite simple in terms of quality over quantity. Note on our side, we tell you you cannot just understand the problem, you need a solution. So even if you accept both, I think on our side you'll have a few people who understand, but on theirs you have none. Ultimately, that's why we're talking about.